Good afternoon to everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to our fourth webinar. Now the time to sell your business. Here at the NYBB Group, we hope that you, your family, and your teams and your staff are doing well. I am Anthony Citrullo and CPA Managing Partner of the NYBB Group. I'm delighted to be your host for today's seminar. We do appreciate you joining us and look forward to bringing you some great information that will be both impactful, add value to you, especially your business or your practice. And the good news is today is the opening day for Long Island. So as everyone knows, we can get a haircut, we can do some outdoor dining, and hopefully, all of our businesses will actually progress as time goes on, and as Long Island and New York City begins to open a little bit quicker, hopefully. Just some housekeeping. There is an attendee chat function for any questions you have. Just click on the chat, enter your questions. Those questions will be addressed after we do our presentation. And also, we do have two upcoming webinars, one on June 17th with where we're going to feature Options Home Healthcare Agency. That is a great opportunity. And the second one is on June 24th. Both are at noon. And we'll be talking on June 24th about buy-side options and growth through acquisition for companies that are in that mode. So our entire staff is excited. We have an action-packed hour, and thrilled to have three extremely talented and experienced professionals who have had tremendous success working with family-owned businesses, privately held companies. They assist the owners in their exit and know exactly what is necessary for that sale to be maximized, and typically really protecting those folks with what is really their most valuable asset in most cases. So that's a brief introduction of our experts on hand today. So we have Stuart Smith from Wilmington Trust. He's the National Director of Business Value Strategies with Wilmington Trust. He's a founding member of the M&A Corporate Finance business at M&T Bank. He was also past director of the investment banking group at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he's been involved in hundreds of transactions, many sophisticated transactions in his years of M&A. We have Mark Blaustein, who is a CPA and a tax attorney. He represents clients in corporate transactions, including the purchase, sale, restructuring, mergers and acquisitions, corporate agreements, in addition to lending his tax guidance to those transactions. He has a family background, which includes business ownership, which gives him some great insight into the business owner today and in terms of what they need. And the third is Kyle Griffith, who is a partner of mine at the NYBB Group. Kyle is a certified business intermediary. He's on the board of governors for the IBBA. He's really a student of the industry, has helped many people exit their business successfully. He's a master on the marketing side, and he actually has been involved in a family-owned business of his own. In fact, several that have been very successful. He specializes in logistics, some transportation, HVAC businesses. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our panel of experts. And we're going to get started. And I think the first thing is, and we'll start with Stuart, and we're looking at business owners today, and if they're considering and looking at offering and selling their family-owned business, their privately held company, their valuable asset, what do you think how can they prepare themselves given, the past 3 months and perhaps, looking at the past number of years where there've been some interesting situations, everything from today's pandemic to the 2008 recession to things like Hurricane Sandy?
Okay, well, thanks, Anthony. I apologize that everybody can't see me for some reason, but you can just focus on the great picture of me that started off the whole program. I think that as we've been helping clients navigate through this time, I'm sort of looking back to actually the 2008, 2009 timeframe. And during that period, when we were calling on a lot of commercial clients of M&T Bank, if you visited them in late 2008, the sky was falling, right? and the glass was definitely half full. If you went and saw them 6 months later, they'd adapted. They'd done the things they could to stabilize the business and go forward. The glass was half empty before, now it was half full. Sorry, I misspoke earlier. So the fundamental thing there was that the water level hadn't changed in the glass, but perspectives had, because they sort of adjusted to the new normal. And as I think about people as they consider exiting their businesses right now, I'd encourage people, to take a hard look, to make sure you're not making a knee-jerk reaction in the moment as you think about that. Because if you look at the M&A market, in my view at least, right now, and I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists, I think the traditional source of funding for an M&A transaction is usually going to be a bank loan, and banks have got their hands full right now. And I think buyers are maybe being careful about their, preserving their liquidity as well.
That's good. And Mark, if you could follow up in terms of what your perspective is, what you've been seeing out there.
Well, I've been seeing a lot of people that were on the fence, and now the wall has collapsed and they're reevaluating their lives. Older people, maybe in their late 50s, early 60s, are looking ahead and saying, is this the time I should really be thinking, when maybe I was going to stay in the business for the next 5 to 10 years? So the forward looking has really changed to a more, will my business come back? Will I have something to sell? And a lot of people right now are in survival mode, because they have to reboot their businesses and see if they can get their cash flows going and see if the same earnings will come in. I know personally, I have a lot of clients that are really evaluating whether it's time to make their exit. When times are good, people don't act. When times are bad, they tend to think more, and they react. So there are opportunities out there. I have clients that are also looking to purchase businesses to consolidate their businesses from an overhead point of view, because there's going to be things out there to buy. We were talking about earlier before it started. So I think we're in interesting times. I think history repeats itself, and those who have vision going forward will be there to pick up opportunities that other people see for themselves.
Yeah, and I know we've had an enormous amount of buyer inquiries and private equity guys. And Kyle, I know you're involved nationally with some organizations. You probably have a perspective there in terms of what's going on, in terms of and what is going on in terms of in looking at business owners and what they should do.
Well, I have to echo my colleagues on the panel here. Definitely, first off, you want to look back and see how you performed. The buyers are going to want to see your numbers from 2008 to see how you bounce back. It really depends on the business owner and what their motivations are. Okay, most people ask me, when is a good time to sell your business? You want to sell your business when you're doing well and your numbers are trending upwards. So, like what Stuart mentioned, you don't want to make a knee-jerk reaction. So the market crash, or we have this pandemic, all of a sudden I want to sell. You want to plan 5 years and ahead. Okay, so if we have a situation like we have right now with COVID, it definitely has affected a lot of businesses. Is the reason you're looking to sell because of COVID, and hey, I've been through a recession, now I'm going through COVID, hey, I'm done, get me out of here? Or you already planned to sell before because you were seeking to retire in 2020, you want to get out. So it really depends on what the seller's motivations are. As far as your plan to exit, the steps you need to take doesn't really change. You need to assess where you're at. That would start with evaluation and a complete diagnostics of your company. We want to make sure we identify any flags or loopholes or challenges that we can actually correct before you go to market. So now's a good time to assess your business, see where you're at, strengthen up your strengths and your weaknesses, try to cover them, so we can make sure we can make you more valuable when you do plan to sell. As far as throughout the market, activity is definitely up. There are a lot of buyers out there looking for opportunity. Now is a fabulous time to buy a business. There are a lot of opportunities there available for buyers. Capital is still available, so sellers can feel confident that yes, there will be buyers looking for their business. there is capital. They just have to be understand that buyers now, they're going to be doing more due diligence, and they're going to be, you have to make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, because the buyer is going to be checking everything. As before they may look over a couple of things, but now they're going to scrutinize your documentation, your business more in these times.
That's good. That's good. And if anybody has any follow-up comments and you want to interject, you can. But I think so. Let's say there's someone who really feels like this is the right time, and I need to kind of move forward. What would you expect during like the marketing and presentation process? Perhaps compare it now to maybe the normal time frame pre-pandemic. Let's say, what obstacles would you expect someone to see as we go through that process? Stuart, maybe you can kind of comment.
Sure. I think that one of the first things you got to consider is, okay, where is your business relative to sort of the growth and earnings curve that it was on? I think that we're going to look back a year or two from now, whenever this really is behind us, and there'll definitely be this notion of what was your COVID add back, right? And so the trick right now, I think, if you really are going to go to market, is demonstrating that your business can get back on the curve, and that you have the numeric and support for how you're off the curve, and then the ways that you are getting the business back on the curve. Any buyer is looking to know that that what they're getting is going to transfer easily to them, all the know-how, all the relationships, etc. They want to know that what they're picking up is predictable, but for something like this situation, and they want to know that the business is going to be sustainable. So, and I don't mean sustainable in the eco sense, although that's important too, but that it's going to be able to manage through thick and thin. So demonstrating that is what's going to be critical if you're going to make a move in the next few months.
It's interesting because I've heard about the COVID add back and the COVID kind of restructuring, and I think it's really uncharted waters. Mark, what would you expect to kind of look at in those terms?
I also think from a due diligence point of view, that has just absolutely changed, and people have to be more concerned about the way we did our due diligence has changed. Even physically going to view a business, walk around, in the old deli days, you sold the deli or a pizzeria, you sat in the pizzeria for the week and you watched the register. So certain ways of doing your due diligence to physically look at the assets. Can you get into the facility? I'm still trying to figure out with clients that I'm talking to, how do you deal with these questions that were very easy? As I said before we started, the easy things are now difficult to do. The simple things that we did before now have changed. The world gets more comfortable with people physically coming into an office or a space. I think it's just going to be a challenge, and you may see a buyer saying, hey, I want to hold an escrow. I want some type of contingency on the back end because of these uncharted waters, and I really didn't get to take my x-ray of the business like I normally would.
Yeah. And Kyle, I know you've had some potential buyers who actually have met with sellers and viewed some of the opportunities you have. I mean, what has been the reaction, and also from a marketing standpoint and a presentation standpoint, what are you trying to accomplish to overcome it?
So you want to distinguish your business and differentiate it from other opportunities. Buyers are shopping around, right? They're looking for opportunity that can give them the best return on their investment. They're going to compare your business to others. So the key thing in the market and the presentation is key. What makes your business better than your colleague you're down the block from you that has a similar business? What can we do to enhance that, and what we can do to make sure the deficiencies and issues that we can get them to resolve. Buyers do have a lot of objections. So, for example, we are representing a HVAC company. And when you guys, those of you who left your house today, including myself, it was pretty warm. Today is going to be pretty humid. Summer is pretty much upon us. So you would think that HVAC businesses would be in demand. No one wants to sit down in a house that's 100 degrees, right? So you would think that HVAC is an essential business, and hey, my business would sell right away. Maybe not. Buyers are still very conscious to the fact that we are going through a pandemic. So they're looking at your human capital, or your mechanics. Are they licensed? Are they trained? How are you retaining how you maintaining and training your staff? Have any of them been affected by COVID? If you don't have mechanics and servicemen and women to service your clients, then what business is there? So apart from your deliverables and apart from the value you bring to the marketplace, you have to completely look at your business up and down and see where and what needs to be addressed. And as Mark alluded to earlier, you have to understand that chances are most buyers will want to manage their risk, and they can manage that by actually um, going through an earn-out process, paying you a percentage of retained sales earnings, post close. So that's something you have to definitely be aware of. But the buyers that I'm speaking with, they're very cautious. They make an investment. It's a risky time to invest, but the buyers that actually are educated and they've done a couple of deals, are sophisticated. They know that they're going to be taking a risk, and they're willing to take the risk. But you have to present an opportunity that makes sense for them to pull the trigger on.
So let's pick up on the risk factor. And I think when we are going through transactions and we're kind of speaking to folks who may be in the process of looking, we say, look, I think there are three things people need to look at, and a lot of times the buyers look at. One, they look at net cash flow, and clearly, that's been affected, at least in the short term, and people don't know what the future is. The second thing is they assess is risk, and risk, a lot of different levels of risk. And the third thing is they look at is scale. They see if they can scale the business. So I'd like everybody to kind of address some of the risk factors that even I mentioned, and even ones that you see as some of the most critical ones that there are, and really what is a way to overcome them, and perhaps how critical do you see them as part of this whole process in terms of getting a transaction done? Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on the right ones right out of the box. What's the earnings impact of what we've had? But usually what moments like this do is bring into pretty sharp focus some of the other areas of your business that in normal times might be just kind of clicking along, but are probably wise to be looking at. As this all started, I was working with a client, and they have a pretty neat fabric business here in the U.S., and they import two of their key fabric items from other parts of the world. And I said, and they're coming from two different factories. That's it. And I said, well, what happens if that all gets stalled as this pandemic starts to spread? Oh, it's fine. Then you dig a little bit deeper, and not only are they really the sole suppliers to the company, but the company sends its engineers over a couple times a year to help the owners of these factories fine tune that equipment. Okay, wow, that's a real value problem for you in the long haul, because that's know-how that you're providing that if you disappear as an owner because you're selling the business, you're not necessarily going to optimize your multiple there. So that's just a great example of something that's been exposed because now their supply has slowed down and they've had to figure out how to do things differently. And the factories abroad have been hit by COVID. So, that's what I'm encouraging folks to do if they can be stable with their business. And it echoes something that Kyle said a couple minutes ago. In the military, this would be called what's a tactical pause. The battle's died down for a little bit. You're looking around. What's next? How do I proceed? Take the time to think about your next moves and plan them. And that's not necessarily easy to do, I get, but it's better than being reactive in the moment.
Okay, Mark, maybe I don't know if you have any specific instances of transactions that are happening currently, or some that maybe you've done in the past that.
Yeah, I'm in the middle with one right now. It's interesting, supply chain, which I never really realized how critical is. I have a client that's a trophy manufacturer. Anything with the word school or restaurant in it, And it's just amazing the devastation these words have caused in the name of a business. So I have a trophy manufacturer, had about 100 employees, had to lay off 95 of them, waiting for schools to reboot. And he's got his PPP money, and he's going to be selling the business and trying to prop it up. And obviously going forward, he never thought about it, but trophies are made out of acrylic. And all of a sudden, he wants to, if the school's open, trophies and awards, internet-based company, now all of a sudden he can't get material. Everyone's making masks, shields, and dividers for the office. So to get clear acrylic, it doesn't exist anymore. He has a 4-month, 5-month wait for something he got the same week because other people saw opportunities to manufacture and they took his supply of acrylic that he no longer can get. So what he had to do, he's being creative. Instead of doing clear, he found black acrylic or colored acrylic and now has to redesign the trophies. That was his solution. So a business that depends upon raw materials that are now being used for other things, like when masks. Remember, all of a sudden, everybody wanted to be in the mask business. We're going to do this, we're going to change it. All of a sudden, the raw materials for the masks were hard to be found because everybody wanted to manufacture. Because, again, supply and demand will always rule the market. But it's interesting, the supply chain, whether it be in the pharmaceutical industry or in my client's business, is something to factor in for a business owner wanting to buy to make sure that he can actually operate the business going forward the way it was operated prior.
You know, it's interesting that we don't realize that, you know, those of us who just haven't been able to find paper towels or Clorox wipes or things like that, we don't necessarily realize how that affects some of the other industries that use the same type of products. So I think it's pretty interesting how that works. Kyle, and maybe you can give us some examples as well.
So you talk about the risk, right? So Mark, you brought up an interesting point there. So another thing that buyers look at is, you know, vendor concentration. So you have one vendor that's supplying you a majority of your stock and inventory. That could be a problem. If that raw material is acrylic, like you mentioned, and it's not available, you pretty much buy into a business that has limited access to inventory materials. The other big one would be customer concentration. You want to make sure there's some diversification in your customer base. There's not no one customer that's bringing in more than 5 to 10% of revenues. I mean, that would be a huge risk if you had a customer that brings in half the business and that customer walks away. Now, every deal has its challenges, right? So that may be a good or a bad thing, but if we can get a contract done with that particular customer prior to close, to give the buyer some confidence that that will continue, we can still get a deal done and work out some sort of an earn out if that customer stays around post transaction. So the opportunities to get deals done, but you want to minimize the risk as much as possible. I mean, I'm not an attorney or anything, but there's a lot of legal risk as well that you need to review as far as contracts, leases. You don't want to, if the business is location driven, and it's dependent upon the location. You have an expiring lease. Is that landlord going to renew the lease? We closed on a business in the city. It took us, almost close to a year to get that lease negotiated. The landlord was a huge conglomerate, and that actually killed it actually did kill the deal. But the buyer is very motivated to buy the business. So you have the legal risk, you have the financial risk, and you have the risk of human capital as well. You want to make sure there's some key personnel in place. Key personnel, you want to make sure that they stay in place. You can offer them some stay agreements, okay, to make sure that they continue after the business is bought. Or even option to offer some of them some stock. There's some options as far as employee stock options and so on. So there's a lot of opportunities, but you have to make sure that you cover all these risks and you have these conversations prior to going to market, so we can identify them and fix them.
And that's good. And for instance, interesting, we have a client who's in the food distribution business, and the business was under LOI, and then the pandemic hit. Prior to that, one of their major customers went into bankruptcy, and some of their clients include the airlines and include some big box stores. But one of their other clients includes a customer like Amazon Fresh, who has food. So here we are, we're 3 months in, the numbers are clearly off. Some of the existing customers are starting to come back online, some of the big box stores. The buyers are saying, well, when will they come back online? How long will it take? And at what level will they actually lose business? So it's really, we'll get to adjusting some of the terms in a second, but I think sometimes you can't really measure, you can't really anticipate the risk, right? Because how many pandemics have we had? But what I wanted to talk about quickly is what about due diligence? I mean, what happens now if somebody's kind of going through this process? What do you think due diligence, how does it really impact what we're looking at on the diligence side? Stuart, maybe you can kind of touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think that diligence is going to go real hard at the numbers first, because it gets back to my point about where are you on your earnings and revenue curve. And then from there, most people like to think that, gosh, due diligence is just about the numbers. Quality of earnings has a lot to do with some of the things we've been talking about here, in terms of what systems do you have in place that are going to make the business easily transferable? What are the key relationships and what is the health of those relationships? So those various things, I think, are going to be really critical in the diligence process. You got to expect that there's going to be a really deep dive because, look, people are laying out cash in a time that's uncertain with plenty of liquidity concerns. They're going to want to, know that they're going to be receiving what they thought they were going to receive based on the materials that were shared. So it's going to buckle down pretty hard, I'd say.
I think so. Mark?
Well, I think you're going to have, again, a couple of years ago, cash was king. A lot of people were getting substantial amounts of cash at closing with small escrows. I think that may be flip-flop now. You may be getting smaller down payments, longer payout terms. And the interesting factor is, someone took a note over 5 years and they were getting 6, 7, 8, 9% interest because of the market now. I think we're going to see very low interest rates on these stretch out payments, which affects the total value that a business owner gets. A lot of my clients are looking for this as also part of their retirement income, and they don't mind taking notes and holding notes because they see it as a stretch out for their income. I see that with a lot of professional practices. I recently had an optometry practice that sold, and the last few weeks I've been unwinding deals. So everyone that had a note, everything has been renegotiated. Everything has been stretched out. I can't pay you. I owe you for 2 years. Now I'll pay over 5 years. Why? Because the cash flow has changed. So a lot of the people who sold are reevaluating. I had some uncomfortable discussions with clients say, do I take back my business? Do I resell it? Or, but I'm afraid some people who bought businesses said, hey, they're going to hand it back to the seller and say, hey, let's make a deal. You take it back, cancel the note, whatever. You're going to see bankruptcies. My practice has been damage control with opportunities. So we're going to have to see the normal deal. Anthony, we did a deal last year, substantial cash down. That type of deal will not be around anymore for a while because of the future uncertainty. And you're going to see the valuations are good today, but will they hold in the future with a price adjustment? And listen, we used to do deals and there would be a kicker, a price adjustment up. What if the number we were talking about last year, if the numbers went up, I got a kicker at the end. Now we're looking at the downside, but also if you structure a deal properly, there could be some upside too. So if you're smart in your negotiations, you will try to get a deal done and maybe protect the upside and be able to get a higher price in the end if you reach those numbers. A lot of times that involves the seller staying on to manage the transition and also to potentially train the new buyer, for the new opportunities out there. He becomes a partner, in effect, to make sure, A, he gets paid what he's for, and potentially for maybe some future growth that he can also get some value out of.
And Kyle, I mean, the same thing. We've been through a lot of interesting due diligence processes, and I think we're doing a few now. What would you kind of mention about that?
Yeah, I think colleagues have it covered. Two things I want to input. That there is opportunity there for capital. So you're right. There's going to be a lot of deals where there's going to be earnouts and a lot of contingencies and so on. But right now, the SBA has a program where if you were to get a deal funded by September 27th, they will make your first 6 months payments. Obviously, that's for smaller transactions up to, I believe it's 5 million. But there is opportunities, and that's a low interest rate as well. But without bank financing, sellers going to have to, hold the paper and so on. So, but with that being said, I mean, I'm not an economist. No one really has a crystal ball or anything, but I do read a lot of reports, and the feeling is that I think we have reached the bottom of this. We're going to start kind of clawing our way out. We took a huge hit the first quarter. When the second quarter numbers come out for the M&A industry, we're going to see that we dropped again. But I think the third quarter and the fourth quarter should be pretty good. The economy's starting to open back up. The stimulus has helped many businesses between the PPP and the EID loan, which has been wonderful for a lot of businesses. They have 12 months to make their payments, and it's over 30 years at a 3.75 interest rate. So we think the confidence in the market, as in buyers looking at opportunities, is going to increase. And, a lot of them are very thirsty for deals too. So if you have a solid company with great infrastructure, a good business, you could hold close to your price and maybe get close to what the terms that you request. So we think that there's going to be good opportunities for both buyers and sellers in the next few months to come. But you have to be patient. You have to understand we're still going through a pandemic, so you have to be patient with the current circumstances.
Good mention. Good mention. And I think we're all not attorneys here. Mark is, and but I think there's going to be an impact on. And you mentioned it earlier, Mark, terms, conditions on contracts. So I wanted to see what the panel thought about that, and if you have seen any specific adjustments that have already been made on deals that may be in process, and you can give some specifics on deals that had closed in terms of what the overall ramification was. I know there was something Mark and I were talking about with someone who had escrow, and the escrow was tied into meeting certain targets, and of course, given the pandemic, they couldn't meet the targets, so obviously that escrow went away. But if we could talk about some of those type of things, I think it would be useful. One of the comments from one of the people who are watching the seminar said, there's the risk of the economic downturn seems to be the biggest concern at the moment, and maybe that's something that gets addressed in the terms and conditions. So, I mean, what were your thoughts about that, Stuart? You probably structured a lot of deals in your time, and
Sure.
how does somebody protect on the downside and the upside, and what do you think in this situation what we're looking at?
Well, I think first we've sort of, whether we like it or not, we've sort of entered a bit of a buyer's market right now with where we are. And it was cited earlier in the conversation, the number of folks that are out there willing to buy. Well, they're willing to buy because the prices are potentially right. So, I think that if I were putting a business out there right now, you got to consider what you think you need to get out of the business and what you can get out of the business. And that delta becomes the structuring that you end up doing to try to close that gap. Okay. So as an example, an earnout. Okay, I'll take, I really think my business is worth 6 times EBITDA. You want to pay me 4.5. How does that earnout work to get me really better than 6 times ultimately if the business, does what the owner thinks it can do, and you're sort of putting your money where your mouth is. Seller paper is another way to go. That's usually a classic way of trying to narrow a gap between what the expectation is on a current multiple and what the market's willing to bear out there. I think there's probably some added pressure on seller paper right now because of where I think you're going to see the bank financing market go. And then, reps and warranties in these transactions, they're going to be really heavily negotiated, even more so than maybe usual, because, again, it gets back to a point I made a few minutes ago about, okay, is what I'm getting sustainable, transferable, and predictable. And I think that's going to flow to working capital adjustments and transactions as well. In particular, if you think about the collectability of receivables. So those are things that I'm, would be really focused on right now. And I think that it's, again, it gets back to the opening comment I made during this particular ramble of mine, that it really is kind of a buyer's market in my belief right now. And so it's going to require some flexibility and creativity to get where you want to get.
That's good. And I really believe, you hit on something big. I think the working capital adjustment is going to be kind of almost could be a backbreaker, right? Depending on how it works out. So, Mark,
particularly with the emphasis on liquidity right now, right?
Absolutely. Mark, what were you looking at? I mean, you're just structuring deals with the terms and
conditions. Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, it's funny. I don't know. We've heard this new word, force majeure. Take my business law textbook that I used to use to teach business law out and read a couple paragraphs, because all of a sudden the legal world, that new word has come about in terms of negotiation. So what I'm seeing in a couple of deals I'm involved in, sometimes you'll do a deal and the contract and closing will occur simultaneously. So you got no deal until the end. Most deals, you'll have a contract, an executory period, and then a closing. The due diligence is done in the middle. So I'm already finding the force majeure language, the negotiation on it, for an event, a COVID-19 pandemic event. I actually uttered the word civil unrest last week, and I had an argument with an attorney. I said, yeah, on. All of a sudden, my store's bought. I want to be able to terminate the contract. So I'm more concerned about, once I start the process, give a down payment, I'm in the due diligence, everyone's saying the second wave. So it's been interesting. I've been talking to a lot of people. My law school roommate is involved with the NBA Players Association, he's the lead counsel. And I went to him on this force majeure, and they actually, in the NBA's contract, they have the word virus in it. So a lot of these contracts had the word virus in the force majeure clause. So there's going to be some litigation. But now I'm using civil riots, virus, pandemic. Who would have thought these things would ever come into contracts? But now they're like negotiated terms. So it's an interesting factor of the risk allocation, because I'm not sure a buyer wants to go to closing if we have a second wave, and that will possibly destroy what he thought he was buying. So there's a big fear factor in that, and we're trying to remedy that, obviously, contractually.
Yeah. And Kyle, what were you thinking?
If I can add two things I can add. One is I think what you will see in a lot of contracts is clauses about the PPP. So, for example, if the seller has to pay that back, you're going to see in some contracts where the attorney will actually put the PPP fund that may or may not be forgivable in escrow in the event that they have to pay it back. So they may carve out the PPP funds from the actual, from the purchase price and hold that in escrow. That's one thing it's new. And then the other thing, I would say the employment contract for the owner. Most buyers want to keep the owner on at least for a year or 6 months to a year or more. It depends on the nature of the business. So negotiating that contract can be very interesting. I'm sure Mark can attest to that. You have some owners that may want to continue making what they made when they own the business, so as an employee of the buyer, you would not expect to make the same amount as when you work for yourself. So that can be very tricky as well. So those are two things I could add, but I think Stuart and Mark covered all the other items very clearly and articulated well.
Sure. And it's interesting because we have a couple of another ongoing transaction that it was pre-pandemic, and the person was approved for financing, and then all of a sudden it's in the HVAC space. The individual said, gee, there's so many things I don't know. I don't know if the staff is going to come back to work, if the staff is going to want to come back to work. We don't know if the customers are going to let them in the house. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave. So the buyer said, listen, you know what I'll do? I'll take an earn out, and he wanted to take an earn out basically on the complete purchase of the business with a small amount down. And obviously the sellers felt that that was too much risk. The unfortunate part is there aren't as many buyers who were willing to make a transaction happen during this whole pandemic period. So I think you kind of limit your options in a lot of ways. And as one person said, the risk of the current economic downturn seems to be two things: either a concern of people, or it's a great way to leverage your position, right? So if you're negotiating a deal, you can really kind of negotiate a deal and lever your position that way. I think we'll see a lot of that happening, and that's where we're going. I have a few questions from the audience. Does anybody on the panel have anything else to add in terms of what we're talking about? Any other case studies that you have, or anything else?
Yeah, I have one comment, Anthony. I think all of us, here, act as facilitators, and we have to be creative. So one of the things I'm going to try again. It depends if I represent a buyer or a seller. There may be a view that you try to facilitate a deal by having a partial fixed price with a partial contingent price. So you have to be creative here, because if you're a seller, you want to make sure, you want to cut your risk and everything, but you also want to realize maybe your minimum. So I haven't done it in years, but I think I've been going to talk to people about potentially, hey, do we take part of this fixed, part of this contingent, and maybe that'll entice a buyer. I hate to use the word, we're partners in the new business to a certain extent, but we also feel comfortable that we've gotten out what we need, at least for what I think what Stuart brought up, what we want, what we need, maybe two different things. But, we as advisors will help to facilitate these things and come up with creative ideas. I always tell people, if you're a little unhappy, you make a deal. If someone's really happy, then someone got a good deal and someone got a bad deal. So everyone's got to be a little unhappy to strike the chord where we can get the deal done.
That's a good point. Good point. So, and I think that's probably the message. No matter when you're doing a deal, right? There has to be some level of flexibility, and we find. I would say we would get 100% of all of our deals completed if sellers were kind of. I think sometimes there's seller's remorse in terms of deals, and sometimes it's because they're not willing to be flexible. I think you find that. And here, we need ultimate flexibility, I think, in order to get something done. And look, if you believe in your business, there could be a very good upside for you, depending on how you structure the deal, and if the business is going to kind of hold strong. We have a few questions in the chat, and one's pretty interesting that I think we want to attack. One said, "How should we adjust the 2019 tax return so we can apply a multiple based on what's happened with the pandemic? Is there a prudent method to use, or what would be your thinking about that?" I know, Stuart, you've mentioned that before, but if you could kind of circle back, that would be good.
So, I'm thinking about the fact that we would want to adjust the 2019 tax return because COVID didn't, really affect 2019 earnings, right? So, I'm wondering if the notion is, do you reduce your income there, if that's what the question is? I think that you let the history be the history, quite honestly, and you got to think about what's going on in the near term with your business. I think hopefully your folks are using a good dashboard to keep track of what's going on in their business on a month-to-month basis. April was particularly harsh, right? Because it was the first full month and people were trying to figure out what was going on. So I'd probably be looking at the delta of this April versus prior Aprils to start to try to figure out where, what's the hit that I've incurred here. And I'd then look and see how May trended versus prior Mays. I'm sure it's down, but perhaps it came up, and try to start to construct an argument that way with respect to the COVID impact here.
So if I may add, Anthony, so it's excellent point, Stuart. So I think what you want to do is look at the benchmarks for your particular industry. So to Stuart's point, if your revenue is down in April and May of 2020 compared to 19, you want to see see how that look compared to other. So, for example, if you're in the trucking business, and most trucking companies saw a 15% hit on their revenues due to COVID, but you had a 25% hit, you may want to look at maybe adjusting your income between 15 and 20, so, some along those lines. And banks, and I'm sure Stuart can attest to this, when they're reviewing the 2020 numbers, they're going to look at the COVID impact, so they'll make some adjustments, within reason. The key question is, do you have ability to bounce back? Because we have seen COVID actually obliterate some companies, and they have not been able to either reopen, and they've lost a lot of customer base to maybe some of their competitors. So it is unique to each business owner's particular scenario. But to answer the question, from the banks that I've been working with, they're willing to make some adjustment in 2020 numbers because of the COVID impact, but not a lot. It's within reason, and it's benchmarked based upon other businesses that is in your particular sector.
Sure. It's interesting because one of the transactions we're working, we have trailing 12 months information, and now we're updating the trailing 12 months every month. And the first month where things were very bad, the gross revenue was down by about 55%. And now, slowly but surely, here we are in the third or fourth month of the comparison. Now we see the gross revenue is down by about 45 or 40%. And we can identify the clients who have not begun reordering and have not received deliveries. So, if you can kind of track it, and you look, year over year and trailing 12 months, and you look at one customer and one client versus another, you can see where their revenue is coming back. At least you can present a case that the business will be back to some sort of normalcy or some sort of sustainability, and maybe you can predict it based on the ones that are coming back. It's a little bit of a hard sell sometimes, because, as I said before, I think people will leverage that information. And it's funny because the one question really was, is there a rigorous way to determine the value based on what's happened based on past manifestations? So someone said, if you compare it to 9/11, or you compare it to Sandy, or compare it to the previous downturn, and I don't really kind of have any inclination in terms of what happened back then. I know in 2008 we had deals that just got kind of kiboshed at that point. So I don't know if anybody has any kind of memory about what's happened based on those periods of times.
I could think back to 2008, 2009. It became kind of what I would call a barbell market. You had companies that were pristine, sort of A companies, and then you had F companies, and those tended to be the ones that were in the market. Yeah, and the A companies, as everybody settled down, actually had great interest. I can certainly reference some different deals we did at the time. The F companies, they're struggling for survival. A lot of times, particularly in the private equity world, those B, C, and D companies, which was that was the barbell itself, the very thin part, those weren't of particular interest, because the fixer-upper opportunity in an environment like that just wasn't particularly attractive. Those are the folks that I think take advantage of the tactical pause right now. Figure out what they can do to improve their businesses and move them from a C to a B or a B to an A. For companies out there, it's going to take a little bit, but if they are really good on the transferability, predictability, and sustainability fronts, and have been maybe affected, but have navigated through and have been reasonably recession-proof here, they're going to get a lot of interest. I think that multiples will still be depressed, but the thing about particularly private equity buyers is they've got to put money to work. And at some point, they're going to have to start loosening up the purse strings.
Yeah, and I could see it happen. Anyone else have any specifics?
I can say that it could happen in reverse as well. I have a client where the numbers actually went up. They're in the DME space, and they went up at least 25%. So you could be adjusted back the other way as well, because that is probably not going to continue into 2021. So that could happen. The adjustment could be in reverse as well.
Yeah, I
Barry,
think that's a great point.
you're just evident. We see a lot of liquor stores. We don't sell them out of liquor stores, but in that particular space, they've made a lot of money during these times, and that might just be a blimp in April and May, possibly through June, but it may not continue. It just depends.
Well, and it raises a really good point, and something that I've said a few times during the call. It's all about the curve that the business is on from an earnings standpoint. We see so many, I used to see so many owners. I've had my best year ever. Let's sell because my earnings are as high as they've ever been, and I'll get a multiple of that. And it's like, yeah, but wait a second. You executed on a really sweet contract last year that pushed your earnings to that level. It was a spike relative to your history. What's going to happen next? So I agree with you wholeheartedly, Kyle.
That's good. I have one other question from the audience, and it's an interesting one. Does anybody see that there may be more possibility for employee buyouts of businesses with retiring owners, using, it actually says, how about retiring owners using broad-based employee buyouts to achieve their goals? We not necessarily maybe an ESOP, but perhaps employees would be a good opportunity for someone. Mark, you have any thoughts?
Well, I think if you have an age difference, you have an older seller, younger, the second generation, now might be the time to raise those discussions, because they may be your best purchasers because you know them, you know their capabilities, and you may be able to get better terms with them in terms of valuation, and you trust them more than the stranger that comes to buy your business. So I do see that as opportunities to engage in discussions with the second generation that's been in your business with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll see if there are any succession plans or any kind of exits that go in that direction. I don't know.
It's funny. I'm seeing a lot with a lot of older accountants. We talked about this, Anthony, where I remember the 1986 Tax Act, and I first in 87, there were these older accountants that said, I don't want to learn that. So, I think with the adaptability with technology about running your office, like how many people want to run an office remotely? A lot of these older accountants are used to coming into the office, having their staff, and the technology of learning to run a remote office. So I'm talking to a lot of older accountants like, Mark, it's time. I'm not going to go through this transition. I can't handle the technological changes of adapting my old style of working. I don't want to. I'm 70 years old, and I'm going to go talk to my staff or the younger accountants, say, hey, why don't you think about taking over my practice and as an exit strategy? So I think, professional practices, we have engineers, accountants, even some lawyers I've been discussing, they don't, because I see from the professional practices, the traditional office may change permanently, because a lot of people are seeing they don't need the space. They can do everything in the cloud. They don't need to only meet with people. I'm only going to the office twice a week, only to meet with people. Everything else is done remotely because I'm trying to space out in my office with the people I share office space with. So until everyone gets a comfort level of having the same capacity in the office and they're getting used to operating on their notebook computers, it's going to drive costs down for your physical space because you have to physically be there. Traffic patterns. So I think you're going to see a dynamic change in the way people live their lives, want to work, and factor into certain businesses that give you the flexibility. Maybe you want to work at home 2 days a week and go to the office 2 days. There's this concept I never heard of, hoteling. I had a discussion with one of the major accounting firms that they will be cutting down their physical office space going forward, and no one will have an office. You will make a reservation at any office you want to be for the day to log in, and that's your office for the day. The old structure of partner offices, associate offices, that whole platform may be gone, may drive your real estate costs. And it's interesting, I have represent a lot of mechanical contractors. The big REITs that own all the real estate in the city are very nervous. How do I get people back into elevators? Do I stagger office hours? So in terms of opportunities, some of the HVAC guys, they still have, as one guy said to me, we still have to protect the asset, meaning that building, whether it's occupied or not, they still have to do the maintenance work on the physical plant. So the only issue that we're discussing with my clients is getting the mechanics in and out of Manhattan, to do the work. I think it's a whole different dynamic. There's opportunities. There has to be some creativity and some vision, because if you come up with a solution, you could get a nice service contract to manage an emptier building, or a building that's empty, until they figure out what to do with the office space in Manhattan.
Yeah, yeah. We have only 2 minutes left. I would like to give everybody a minute just to kind of, give their thoughts about going forward, like a little bit of a summary in terms of what your feelings are going forward, and maybe just a little tidbit for today's business owner to kind of take away. Stuart?
I think that I appreciate everybody being on. I hope that I was able to add some value here. Tidbit from me is keep plugging. I had to give some commentary very early in the COVID crisis, and I said, don't panic. And I had executives at the bank say, but everybody's panicking. And I said, but that's the whole point. We can't panic. Be really directed about where you're trying to go with your planning, and follow that, and involve others. Too many business owners, in my experience, try to DIY stuff rather than thinking through, who do I need in my boat with me to help me get to where I'm going. And there is a lot of interconnected advice that you need to get through a business transition. Make sure that you go get that advice. It is going to benefit you, I promise you.
That's great. Mark?
Yeah, along that note, I think the team concept is very important. Anytime you look to buy or sell a business, it's, it should be a quarterback, but you don't get a touchdown without the players, and there are players that are necessary. I guess my little tidbit would be, I'm a student of history. I always look at history. I believe history repeats itself. If you don't look at history, you fail to repeat it. So we've been through good times, bad times. The world didn't end. And, I think if we view history with a going forward look, we can learn and achieve our goals.
That's good. Kyle?
If I were to add, I mean, you want to take a deep breath, okay? We're going to get through this, right? You want to, first of all, manage your liquidity, manage your cash flow, take advantage of, the opportunities as far as cash is available from the various state and local federal sources, and manage your cash flow. Make sure you're not spending more than you need to spend, and make sure you keep in contact with your customers and clients. You can maintain that revenue stream. And then, if you decide that, hey, I do want to exit, make sure you're getting the right advice. It would start with complete diagnostics of your company, an evaluation. And you want to talk to people who have kind of been there at least the past 10 years, I would think, so they can give you some indication as far as what happened in the previous recession, because it's a roller coaster ride. We have a saying in our business, and the deal has to die at least 5 times before it's done. So, we become psychologists at a certain point. Don't worry, we're going to get through this. Just make sure you have some good people in your team. And we at MIPB Group would be glad to help you, with any of your transition needs. But as my colleagues on the panel stated, make sure you have the right advisors, the right team around you that have been there, done that can advise you and point you in the right direction.
That's great. I just got a few things in closing. I mean, I agree. I echo what you folks are saying. You find somebody who's been there, done that, so to speak, right? I think attitude is key. It's very hard to have a good attitude as you're going forward with trials and tribulations, but it kind of keeps you focused, and your attitude is really important. And I think the one thing you don't want to end up you don't want to end up with making a move that doesn't make sense, and you kind of have a firm grasp on an empty bag. You don't want to end up in that position. You don't have to, because if you have the right people surrounding you, you'll be okay. And look, our next webinar, and Kyle's going to be hosting with a company called Options, which does some home health care agency, and then that'll be on June 17th. And then June 24th, my other partner, Lou Della Prida, is going to be hosting Exploring Buy-Side Through Growth Through Acquisitions. Those are going to be 2 great events that are going to give you different information than what we had here. So I do really appreciate everyone for attending. I thank you to the folks who were the experts on the panel, You did a fantastic job, and she had some great information. Thanks to you and the audience for attending. And listen, have a great day, have a great summer, and enjoy the fact that you can go at least outside and have a hamburger sitting in the street. So